Hi everybody, my name is Stefan Sagmeister. I'm going to tell you what happened when I was getting ready to leave Jakarta in Indonesia in order to give a talk in Osaka in Japan. And at the time, of course, it was still possible to travel. And before getting to the airport, I was doing a careful morning toilet, cleaning my ears with the Indonesian version of a Q-tip. And it turned out that the Q-tips were not properly attached to the stems. And after cleaning, the tip remained inside my ears. And I tried everything to get it out, but it was just in too deep and it drove me crazy. I arrived in Japan at a design hotel with no proper mirrors, and there was simply no way I could get that dislodged tip out with my tweezers that I had got at the airport. And this was so incredibly irritating that later on the bullet train, I overcame my considerable reservations and asked a very proper older Japanese woman if she wouldn't mind to take my tweezers, go into my ear and try to fish it out. And she actually agreed to do this, but to no avail. The cotton tip was just lodged in there too deep. I went through 3 full days of Japan with nothing but constant discomfort and irritation. Then I cut off a little piece of Velcro from my backpack, super glued it onto an empty Q-tip stem, drove it into my ear and voila, fished the Q-tip out. An actual idea. I have to admit that ideas like this are somewhat getting rarer. They used to come faster and somewhat with less effort. And I blame it on evolution. Evolution really built us so that we would have our best ideas in our 20s and 30s. And because experience and power make us implement these ideas somehow more efficiently, we might be even a bit more productive throughout our 40s and 50s. But after that, from a purely evolutionary standpoint, it actually makes more sense to pass on the experience to younger people rather than trying to continue to exploit that meager trickle that's still coming in. And that's really what I'm trying to do here today. This is my truly very, very first how to talk. It's really about how to generate an idea. I myself start every single morning trying to come up with an idea. I put a time limit onto it. Often it can be as short as literally 5 minutes. I do it twice a day, very, very much like brushing my teeth. And it does get easier over time. It does get easier when this becomes a habit. And sadly, there will be suffering. Meaning sitting at a table with nothing coming to mind is not fun. Rejecting bad ideas is not fun. Christoph Niemann, who created this illustration, really became my favorite illustrator anywhere precisely because he is willing to suffer. He sits there every day and rejects day after day. Stephen King once said that he writes every day except on his birthday and on Christmas. And later he admitted that he had actually lied. He does write on his birthday and he does write on Christmas. If you look at the 2 people who really dominated art in the 20th century, Pablo Picasso and Andy Warhol, both of them worked all the time. If you go to the Warhol Museum in Pittsburgh, it alone has 15,000 of his artworks, and Picasso produced an estimated 50,000 pieces of art. Quantity apparently really does lead to quality. And when it comes to ideas, I use 3 methods developed by quite some bigger thinkers than myself. Number 1, pick anything at random and start thinking about it from there. So this odd strategy was developed by a philosopher and thinker from Malta. His name is Edward de Bono, and I've used it many times. Some of our most successful projects are a direct result of this technique. So here is how this works. Say I have to come up with an idea for a podium. So instead of what I would normally do, which would be looking around, looking for podiums, or interviewing people who produce or use podiums, I really start thinking about the idea of a new podium with something random, say with something like a water bottle. And, water, okay, what's the story? It bubbles up, or it's transparent, or maybe I could have a transparent podium, maybe it is made out of glass, maybe there's water inside, or maybe there is bubbles, maybe there is a fish swimming in there, so it's like an aquarium podium. Maybe soothing to an audience, gives them something else to look at rather than just me. I'm not sure how good of an idea that actually is, but I had to spend very little time and energy on it. And of course, De Bono has a fantastic way of explaining why this works, because ultimately our brain is lazy. Thinking consumes a lot of energy, and the brain tries to avoid spending that energy. And if I tell it to come up with an idea, instead it looks for something where there are already a lot of connections between the various nerve cells. And of course, the most tight connections between those cells from the past would be an idea that I had myself previously, or if it's something that I've seen from other people that other people really do. Starting somewhere new really forces my brain to create a new path with no pre-existing connections. And I'll end up with an idea for a podium, but now, of course, using a different route from a different starting point. And here's a project that I applied with using this technique. And we were asked to design a logo for Casa de Música, a fantastic concert hall created by Rem Koolhaas in Portugal. And the musical program was rather eclectic. The client saw the house like a dice. You throw it and very different results come out every single time. One house, many musics. Now, I looked out the window of our New York studio searching for something random, and what I saw was a car. And I thought, okay, I'll design that logo starting with a car. Okay, a car, it has wheels, or the logo has wheels, it is moving, it is changing, it's a changing logo, it changes like a dice, it's always different. I look at the building from all sides, I put a black mask on top of the building, I get all these different iterations from the east and the west, and from the south and the north, from below and from above, and then I colored them in a very particular way by creating a Casa de Música logo generator, a simple piece of software connected to a scanner so that a Beethoven image would result in a Beethoven Casa de Música logo, which means, of course, that if I actually have to design a Beethoven poster, the logo will always fit because it literally comes out of the Beethoven image. And the same, of course, would be true if Frank Zappa plays at Casa de Música. The logo would look like this, or Philip Glass or Lou Reed or the Chemical Brothers who all played there, they all get their individual logos. The same is true for the director of Casa de Música and for the department heads who get their own logos on their stationery and business cards. Now, a full-scale symphonic orchestra lives inside that building. They get their own logo, including the one that goes on the truck that they go on tour in, and there is also a much smaller, a more experimental ensemble there. Now, the mayor of Porto, or the municipality of Porto, they really own their own poster sites in the city of Porto, and they make them available basically for free for all their cultural institutions. So it's incredibly cheap for Casa de Musica to advertise on posters. So there was a big media to be exploited, and we came up with this rule that you could only use for the first 2 years the shape as the main dominant visual element for the poster. And that really worked out well, because you could take that logo, that shape, and make typography out of it. You could grow it underneath the skin. You could advertise a family-friendly event in front of the building, or a rave in the parking garage underneath it. And of course, if you look at this identity, at the end, it has nothing to do anymore with the car that gave the original spark for the whole system. But I would have never come up with the whole system if I wouldn't have started somewhere completely different than the building itself. Number 2, the mind map. This is pretty much the exact opposite approach of De Bono. Tony Buzan developed this technique, and it really allows me to get all my thoughts, all my research, all my ideas down onto one, hopefully, sense-making page. So if I need still an idea for a podium, if I want to really do a large piece of work on podiums, I would write the word podium in the center of a big piece of paper, draw a box around it, and then add connecting boxes about anything that I could possibly know about podiums. There would be a section on podium styles, on materialities, on color, usage, on podium heights, on jokes about podium heights, on the history of the podium. I would write down podium makers. I would talk to speakers on what they hate and love about podiums. I would completely exhaust the theme of podium. And I'll give you an actual project example from our studio. So we had a desire for quite a long time in the studio to create an exhibition on beauty. We felt there was so much emphasis on problem solving in design, not just in communication design, but also in architecture, also in product design, and specifically in digital design, specifically in UX, where everything was very much about functionality and these incredibly important things that we love as humans, things like joy, like delight, like beauty, really had fallen off onto the wayside. So I wrote the word beauty large onto a very big sheet of paper, hung it on the wall, and over the next days and really weeks added every single thought I had about beauty. And over time, larger themes emerged, like the history of beauty, transformational beauty, or simply what is beauty, like a definition of beauty. And from this, we could develop all the actual material for the show, and everything was ultimately opened at a very large exhibition in Vienna that ultimately also traveled to Frankfurt and Hamburg. It's now on COVID break, and it will continue in spring 21 in France. So far, over 250,000 visitors have already seen the show. Now, using the mind map as a template, I could create these little idea sketches like this one, like the rolling wall, which basically, is a wall where visitors within the museum can use these detachable cardboard discs that they got as an entry ticket and basically vote for their favorite color, or their favorite shape, or their favorite landscape, their favorite piece of art, and so forth and so on. And ultimately discover that there is a surprisingly large agreement among people of all different heritages, of all different cultures, of all different age groups, of what they find beautiful and what they don't. And for example, every culture in the world thinks that blue is the most beautiful color. You can tell that by the height of the discs in the blue column on the back of the voting wall, and it ultimately likely comes from evolution, because our ancient ancestors felt that when the sky is blue, it really is a much more beautiful sky. And when the sea is blue, it's a safe sea. Of course, the same would be true for the sky. If it's blue, there's no storm about to come. Now, we also talk in one space, in one room, about the current chromophobia among designers, the fear of color that makes us all dress in black. So there's this room that appears to be completely monochromatic, but then really a window goes up, comes out, and it turns out that the room really is much more colorful than first thought of. So we wanted to show that beauty doesn't really require fancy materials, and so with the help of a fantastic artist, we installed these inflating and deflating white garbage bags. We were able to create a rather meditative pattern for visitors to contemplate while lying underneath this installation. And of course, the exhibition came with a catalog, came with a book, where we were able to talk about this idea that beauty not only influences the way we feel, but also changes the way we behave in much more detail. And of course, there are chapters on the history of beauty, on experiencing beauty, on how beauty can transform us, all really coming from that original gigantic mind map. We can make the point that beauty is neither superficial, commercial, or old-fashioned, that it's in the very center of what it means to be human and also truly essential for our overall flourishing. And of course, there is a rather fancy limited edition. And here is the third technique, walking. Researchers at Stanford asked two groups of people to generate as many ideas as possible. They gave them each an object, and they required them to come up with new plausible uses for that object. So let's say that object is a water bottle. You know, I can come up with a different use for that object, different than drinking from it. Maybe I can use it to scratch my back, or maybe I can look through it and have some sort of psychedelic experience. And so they asked these people to come up with many ideas as possible, and then they divided them into two groups, sent one group out to go for a walk while coming up with the ideas, and then had the other group inside working at their desks. And then they switched the two groups around. The groups who walked came up with 3 times as many ideas than the same people did when sitting at desks. So I'm walking. I take my phone with me so that there is no need to stop and take notes. I just dictate ideas into it and then translate the best ones into my sketchbook when I'm back in the studio. So for an example, I really wanted to create something about long-term thinking, something that reminds me that human flourishing is actually improving over time, specifically when I look at it from long stretches of time. And there is an agreement again about this. I mean, all of us prefer life over death. We prefer health over sickness, food over hunger, peace over war. And all of these things have actually been measured over the past 100 years. Some of them have been measured for 300 years. And all of them have improved worldwide. So my great-granddad actually had an antique store, and I grew up with all of these old paintings in our hallway. And I went for a walk. And it occurred to me that my grandmother, Rosalia, was among the first generation of women that actually was allowed to vote in Austria in 1919. Now, this is pretty much how it was everywhere in the world. If I look at this painting now, that little yellow dot really represents women voting rights in 1900, the pink one in the 1950s, and the purple one now, where pretty much anywhere in the world where you are allowed to vote, anywhere in the world where there's a democracy, women are allowed to vote. And Of course, I'm extremely aware of what kind of year we just had. COVID, the US elections. There's so much trouble. And still, if I look at things from the long term, many developments actually do develop for the better. And the long-term perspective allows me to see things differently. If we take global warming, I had always assumed that China and the US were really the worst offenders when it came to the question who puts the most CO2 up into the atmosphere. But if I look at it from a 200-year perspective, that little yellow dot really represents China, the blue rectangle is the United States, and the big red one, that's Europe, who polluted by far the longest, Industrial Revolution, and the hardest. Interesting. Interesting, of course, is also what I thought when I first heard about that de Bono idea generating technique. I thought, interesting. And then I completely forgot about the whole thing. And it literally was only 10 years later when I came across that idea generating technique again, and I actually tried it out on my own projects, on things that I needed to accomplish, when it completely changed the way that I was working. And I'm sure the exact same thing is happening right now. If you just sit there in front of your screen listening to me, this talk will have zero benefits for you. I am pretty sure. You will need to try these methods out. Tomorrow, you will need to take a project that you need to have an idea for and try it. Like, pick something at random. It takes a minute. It's the first one is so easy to do. The mind map is much more work extensive, and it really works much better if you have a big breast project, if it really needs to have a wide berth for the whole development. And then the last one, go for a walk again. Super easy. Try them out. I think they will work for you too. Now, if you want to make sure that you don't have an idea, the easiest way is to do nothing. Because most of the time, ideas just simply don't show up by themselves. The second best way to have no ideas is to look at other people's designs. If you don't want to have an idea, go and look at Pinterest. If you don't want to have an idea, go and look at It's Nice That. If you don't want to have an idea, go and look at Ion Design. Meaning, as we've heard, our brains are lazy. If we look at other people's design work while we're coming up with an idea, it's absolutely fine to look at lots of design when you're in a different mode of operation. But if you're trying to come up with an idea and you look at other people's work, your brain will try to steal that idea. And that really means that you'll forgo the possibility to surprise the viewer with something new. There's also a good chance now that you're actually going to be found out. It's so easy to Google things. But also, even if you're not found out, in your own heart of hearts, you will always know that this idea, this baby is not yours, that you kidnapped that child. And when you execute a stolen idea, you won't have the energy, you won't have the wherewithal to create that lovely piece of typography to really push that illustration. After all, you're not the parent, you're just a kidnapper. And of course, if you actually have an idea, please send it to me. I critique one piece of design every day on Instagram, and I'll try as best as I can to help you improve it, to make it go one step further. Easy to remember, my Instagram address is at Stefan Sagmeister. All the instructions on how to do it are published at the bottom of my comments every day on Instagram. And of course, very, very much like physical exercise, having ideas doesn't really feel good until you actually sit down and start and do it. And you have to stop thinking about doing something and actually do it. You have to sit down and make that first step. You have to sit down and make the first step. Make the first step. Make the first step. Thank you so very much.